"Your kind doesn't belong here. This party is over." That was the first thing he said before he took a steel baton to my birthday cake, my champagne glasses, and everything my friends had carefully set up to celebrate my 30th. An off-duty cop in cargo shorts walked into my backyard like he owned it, swung that baton like he was raiding a drug house, and he honestly believed his badge was going to protect him from what came next. He had no idea he had just declared war on a federal judge's daughter in front of 40 witnesses with their phones out. My name is Serafina Sterling, and I did not grow up thinking my life would ever look like this. A big brick house in an old money neighborhood, a British racing green Aston Martin in the driveway, movers carrying in art and antiques like they were working in a museum, jazz music drifting across a perfect suburban afternoon. When I pulled into Willow Creek for the first time, I knew exactly what I was walking into. A place built very intentionally to keep people who look like me on the outside of those big iron gates. The lawns were too perfect, the shutters too perfectly faded, the neighbors' smiles a little too tight like they were all reading from the same script about quiet and standards and property values. I stepped out of that car in an emerald green silk dress. The sun caught the fabric, and I could feel every curtain on the street shift every pair of eyes calculating what box to put me in. I didn't know it at the time, but 2 doors down, Officer Rick Vance was standing at his kitchen window with a beer in his hand watching me like I was a crime scene. Rick was 38, the kind of guy who still told high school football stories like they were yesterday, a once athletic cop whose body was starting to show every late-night beer and drive-through order, and whose ego depended on being the law wherever he went. He wasn't on the HOA board, he didn't hold any official power in Willow Creek beyond his badge, but in his mind he was the gatekeeper, the guardian of what he thought this neighborhood should look like. In his world, women like me did not buy the biggest house on the lane with their own money. In his world, if I was in that car and that dress and that house, I had to be a lottery winner, a rapper's girlfriend, an escort who caught a rich client, anything but a black woman who had actually earned what she owned. I found all that out later after discovery and depositions, and whispered stories started coming out, but even that first week I could feel something sour radiating from that house next door. I saw the blinds move when I got out of my car. I saw his wife Janet peek small and anxious and curious, then disappear when he barked something at her. I remember thinking, all right, we have one of those, and then I went back to arguing with the relocation crew about whether or not the grand piano really needed 6 guys to move it. 2 days later, I was in the backyard in a white linen sundress and a big straw hat, walking the property with a landscape architect talking about where I wanted a Zen garden, maybe a Japanese maple, maybe a stone path down to the pool. It was hot. The air smelled like cut grass and chlorine. My shoulders were warm in the sun, and for the first time since the move, I felt my body relax. The click of the side gate latch broke that little pocket of peace. The architect glanced over, thinking it was another contractor. I turned, and there he was, Rick Vance, off duty, but dressed like he was starring in some cop calendar, tight black polo with a blue line flag on the sleeve, cargo shorts, wraparound sunglasses, clipboard in his hand like a prop to make this whole thing look official. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said with this lazy drawl that was supposed to sound neighborly but came out condescending. "Rick Vance, your neighbor. Officer Vance, actually." He tapped the badge clipped to his belt just in case I missed the power dynamic he was trying to set up. My landscape guy looked at me like, "Do you want me here for this?" and I gave him a little nod toward the house. "Let's pick this up next week," I told him. Once we were alone, Rick shifted. The fake smile faded, the body language tightened, and the clipboard came up like he was about to perform an inspection on my existence. "We have a certain way of doing things here," he said, eyes roaming over my pool, my patio, the view. "A standard. Keeps the neighborhood safe, keeps our property values the highest in the state." You could hear the unsaid part humming in the background. "Keeps our neighborhood white and predictable." I just nodded and said, "I appreciate high standards, officer," because I wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. That annoyed him, so he got to his real point. "Part of that standard," he went on, "is our community safety fee. Voluntary, of course, but everybody on this lane participates. It goes toward extra patrols, private security, making sure we don't get any undesirable elements wandering in from the city." And then he looked me dead in the eye. That was the moment right there. He was telling me I was the undesirable element. He was offering me protection from myself. "How much is this safety fee?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. $1,000 a month, he said, like he was quoting a fair price for lawn care. "Cash is preferred, keeps the paperwork simple." I just looked at him for a long second, letting the silence stretch, letting him sit in what he had just said. You know when someone is so comfortable in their little scheme they don't even hear themselves. That was him. So I repeated it back slowly. You as a sworn officer are asking me for $1,000 a month in cash for an off-the-books protection program that isn't in the HOA documents and isn't part of any official department policy, and you're implying that if I don't pay, things might not stay safe for me out here. His jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. He shrugged, like that's how it is. That's when the lawyer in me snapped into place. Are you familiar with Title 18, Section 1951 of the U.S. Code, Officer Vance? I asked. The Hobbs Act, extortion under color of official right. He squinted, confused and angry at the same time. You threatening me? He growled, stepping in closer, using his size like a weapon he's used 100 times. I didn't move. No, I said quietly. I'm letting you know I understand exactly what you're doing and that I won't be participating in your community safety fee. I have my own security and I trust the official services that my taxes pay for. I will not be paying you for protection. The humiliation hit him like a punch. This woman he had already decided was beneath him. This woman he expected to be scared and grateful had just quoted federal law on her patio and put his little racket in plain, ugly language. His face went blotchy red, his neck pulsed. You're making a big mistake, he hissed. I run this neighborhood. People who don't cooperate, life gets complicated for them. Then he stomped back out through my gate, slammed it so hard the latch rattled, and went home to marinate in his own rage. I knew right then that this wasn't over. Men like that don't swallow their pride and move on. They count down until they can get even. The next few weeks it started small. I was driving home one day, turned onto our street, and out of nowhere his patrol lights popped on behind me. I pulled over confused, less than 100 feet from my own driveway. He strolled up to my window with that smug professional look and told me I had rolled a stop sign at the corner. I knew I hadn't, but arguing with a man who writes his own narrative for a living is a fool's game. He wrote a $200 ticket instead of a warning, told me I could contest it in court if I wanted. I paid it online, printed the receipt, and dropped it into a folder on my laptop labeled Vance. Then came the anonymous city code complaint. A guy from municipal inspections showed up apologetic, waving a paper that said my grass was 1/4 of an inch higher than the ordinance allowed. $50 fine due in 30 days. I paid that too, sent my landscapers to cut the lawn twice that week, took a photo of the citation, and added that to the folder as well. His patrol car started showing up on our lane more often too. He'd park across from my house for long stretches, engine idling, sunglasses on, just sitting there like a threat. When friends came over, he'd creep past, slowly looking at their plates, sometimes stopping at the end of the street like he was running checks. It was a campaign of 1,000 paper cuts, each one technically small, each one carrying the message, I see you. I can make your life miserable whenever I feel like it. I didn't file a complaint. Not then. I'd watched enough internal affairs processes to know how that story usually went when it was one black woman's word against Officer of the Year, or whatever title they'd given him. Complaints vanished, reputations got protected, and the person who dared speak up found themselves pulled over even more. Instead, I documented. Dates, times, badge numbers, ticket receipts, photos, notes. I treated my own life like a case file, and I waited because I knew men like Rick always overplay their hand eventually. At the same time, I made a decision. I was not going to let this man shrink my life. My home was not going to become a bunker just because the neighbor with the badge had a fragile ego. So when my 30th birthday came around, I decided to throw the kind of party that said plainly, I live here and I'm not hiding. I hired a Creole catering company as a nod to my family's roots, brought in a jazz trio, strung lights across the yard, filled the garden with orchids and candles. Friends drove in from the city, colleagues RSVP'd, a couple of kind neighbors I had actually gotten to know, said they were excited to come. The afternoon of the party, my father called. Happy birthday, sweetheart, he said in that deep, calm voice that had intimidated more than one attorney. I'm running behind. This emergency appeal fell into my lap. I should be there in about an hour. Everything good out there? Any neighborly drama I should know about? He said it lightly, but my dad doesn't ask questions by accident. For a split second, I looked at the hedge at the house where I knew Rick's blinds were probably quivering. I thought about telling him everything right then. Instead, I swallowed it. Everything is fine, Daddy, I lied. It's quiet, the neighbors are polite. He sighed with relief. Good. You earned some peace. Save me a dance, all right? Always, I said, and I meant it. That was my mistake. not trusting that I didn't have to carry this alone. While my friends started to arrive and the jazz trio tuned their instruments, Rick sat in his recliner next door, listening to every note like it was a personal insult. The music wasn't loud, but it was joyful, it was sophisticated, and it made him feel locked out of a world that had moved right next door without inviting him. Janet, his wife, suggested they close the windows and watch TV. He decided instead to pick up his phone. He called the non-emergency line, identified himself by name and badge number, and filed a noise complaint on his own neighbor, described my party as out of control, shouting, some kind of rager. Then when the dispatcher asked if she should send a car, he told her no, he'd take care of it himself off duty but acting as an officer, and made sure she logged his response in the system. In his head, he had built himself cover. He wasn't an angry neighbor crashing a birthday party, he was Officer Vance forced to restore order on his day off. From my backyard, all I knew was that around 6 p.m., just as the sky turned golden and the band slid into something soft and perfect, the energy shifted. Conversations died down in the middle of sentences, the saxophone wobbled to a stop, and everyone turned toward the hedge. Rick didn't bother with the gate this time. He walked straight through a gap in the boxwood, crushing my flowers under his boots, baton, and gun hanging off his belt. Blue line polo stretched over his gut, eyes wild. He marched right into the center of my lawn like he was walking into a bar fight. "This party is over," he barked so loud it bounced off the back fence. My stomach dropped, but my face stayed calm. I set my glass down, stepped toward him, and said, "Officer Vance, is there a problem?" My voice carried across the yard, polite but firm. "I've had multiple noise complaints," he announced, scanning the crowd with disgust. "This music, this shouting, this is a disturbance of the peace. Your kind of party doesn't belong in Willow Creek. Everybody needs to pack it up and leave. Now." You heard that right. Your kind of party. One of my friends, David, who also happens to be a lawyer with a spine of steel, stepped in between us. "Officer, with respect," he said. "This is a private residence. There is no probable cause here if there's a noise issue. You can write a citation, but you cannot order private guests to leave without a warrant or an actual emergency." Rick spun on him. "You telling me how to do my job, slick," he snapped, hand drifting toward his baton. Then his eyes locked back onto me. "You people think your money buys you a different set of rules," he shouted, voice cracking. "Let me show you what rules apply in my neighborhood." The air got thick, heavy, like everyone was holding the same breath. I felt my pulse in my throat, but my voice got very quiet. "You are trespassing on my property out of uniform after inventing a complaint against me," I said. "I am asking you one last time to leave my home." That was it. The last thread holding his self-control together snapped. "I'll leave when I'm done," he snarled, and he drew his baton. What he did next would have been unbelievable if it hadn't been happening in front of my eyes. He swung his baton across the champagne bar, sending glasses exploding into glittering shards, ice, and bottles crashing to the ground, people screaming and stumbling back. He turned to the gift table and brought that steel down on carefully wrapped presents again and again, tearing through paper and wood and glass, fanning himself with destruction. Then he pivoted toward the cake, that beautiful 3-tier emerald green masterpiece that matched my dress, and with a roar he drove the baton straight through the top tier. Frosting flew across the white tablecloth, across his own shirt, across the grass. He hacked at it like it had personally offended him until it was nothing but crumbs and streaks of green and silence. When he finally stopped, he stood there panting, baton dripping, cake chest heaving, waiting for me to break. I didn't. Inside, something settled. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said softly, eyes still on him, "I'm so sorry you had to witness this. For your safety, please move inside the house." Then to David, "Make sure your firm gets a copy of every video tonight. You will be representing all of us." My guests, bless them, did exactly what I asked. They slipped around him like he was a live wire, stepping over glass, some still filming faces white with shock. Once they were inside, I turned my back on him, walked to the table where my clutch sat, and pulled out my phone. I did not dial 911. I scrolled to the top of my favorites and hit Dad. When he answered, I kept my voice steady. I told him his daughter's birthday party had just been raided by an off-duty deputy neighbor, that my property had been destroyed with a service weapon, that 40 people had witnessed it and had video. I gave him the address one more time and finished with 2 words, "Hurry, Daddy." When I hung up, Rick snorted. "Calling your daddy," he sneered. "What's he gonna do, come down here and ask me nicely to stop?" I looked at him and for the first time that night smiled. "Something like that," I said. Less than 10 minutes later, I heard a car engine, not the rattle of a Crown Vic, but the low, confident purr of a high-end sedan. A door closed with a solid, expensive thunk. Then my father walked into the backyard. Dark charcoal suit tie, still perfectly knotted from court hair graying at the temples, eyes taking in every detail. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." I told him he never touched me, just everything else. Only then did my father turn to Rick. "I am Marcus Sterling," he said quietly, "Judge of the United States Court of Appeals, and you have just made the greatest mistake of your life." I watched the recognition hit him like a wave of ice water. He tried to claw back control, babbling about official police action and responding to a noise complaint, but my father wasn't having it. In a voice I had heard 1,000 times from the gallery, he laid it out. Off-duty officer, fabricated complaint, trespass, destruction of property under color of law, racist statements in front of multiple witnesses, a hate crime and a textbook civil rights violation. Then he pulled out his phone. In under 2 minutes, he called the U.S. Attorney's Office, and the head of the state police invoked federal statutes by number, requested a public integrity team, U.S. Marshals and state troopers to secure the scene and detain an armed, unstable local officer, and instructed them not to involve the local department until state units were already here. When the sirens came, they were deeper, heavier. 2 state cruisers, then black SUVs with government plates, officers in gray uniforms, agents in suits. They photographed everything, bagged the baton, took statements. A state captain walked up to Rick, who was now pale and sweating, and said, "On the authority of Judge Sterling and pending federal investigation, you are suspended. Hand me your badge and your weapon." He unclipped that little silver shield like he was peeling off a layer of skin. When it dropped into the evidence bag, you could feel something end. The rest of it moved in slow, grinding steps like justice usually does, but the result was faster than most. With my father as a primary witness, 40 videos from professional friends, and a pattern of past behavior that Internal Affairs finally dug up, once someone actually demanded they look, the case against Rick was airtight. The U.S. Attorney filed charges under Title 18, Section 242 for depriving rights under color of law, added the hate crime enhancement through in witness tampering for the false report and destruction of property for good measure. He was denied bail as a threat to witnesses fired by his department within 48 hours, and eventually staring down a decade or more, he pled guilty. The day of his sentencing, I sat in the front row of the federal courtroom with my father at my side. Rick shuffled in wearing an ill-fitting suit instead of a uniform, tried to read an apology off a sheet of paper, voice shaking. The judge listened, then set the paper aside. He told Rick he was the worst kind of criminal, one entrusted with the public's power who had used it to terrorize a woman whose only crime was being black and successful on his street, and sentenced him to 4 years in federal prison. People ask me all the time, was that enough? I still don't know. A year later, his old house was sold at auction to help satisfy the civil judgment we filed, and now a young interracial couple lives there with 2 little kids who chase each other across the lawn and wave at me over the hedge. My garden is whole again, my zen corner is finished, and sometimes my dad sits out there with me just listening to the wind. He got a letter from the warden not long ago saying Rick is a quiet inmate, works in the laundry, will be eligible for parole in a couple of years. His wife divorced him, moved back to her hometown. There is no victory in that, I told my father. Just a pile of wasted lives because one man couldn't stand the color of my skin or the size of my house. My dad squeezed my hand and said, "Prejudice is a prison long before the bars go up." He was shackled the moment he decided his hate mattered more than his oath. You refused to join him there. That matters. So now I want to ask you, sitting wherever you are listening to this, what do you think? Was 4 years enough for a cop who used his badge like a weapon on his own neighbor? Do you think the system only works this way when someone powerful is watching? Or do you believe it can work for everyone if we keep pushing? Have you ever seen somebody abuse a little bit of power because they thought nobody would call them out? Tell me your stories in the comments, argue with me, tell me if you think the sentence should have been harsher or lighter. Talk about what justice and accountability really look like where you live. And if this story made you feel anything at all, hit subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that standing your ground with dignity can still bend the arc toward justice, even if sometimes you have to drag it there yourself.